So now we're going to have a presentation from our good friend Joan Grangenois-Thomas. She's talked to us in the past. She's going to talk to us again today about Kwanzaa and talk to us a little about it.
Good morning. Good morning. And thank you all, as always, for welcoming me here today. James Baldwin once said, "To be African American means to be African without memory, and American without privilege." I want to begin today by saying something simple but important. Kwanzaa is not a religion. It does not replace Christmas, Hanukkah, or any faith tradition. It's a cultural observance created to answer a question that many people, especially Black Americans, were never fully allowed to ask. Who am I? And where do I come from? Kwanzaa was created in the late 1960s during a period of social unrest and deep questioning in the United States. It emerged as a response to centuries of forced disconnection, when people were stripped of language, lineage, and history, and then expected to function as if none of that loss mattered. Kwanzaa was designed to say, culture matters, memory matters, and dignity matters. At its core, Kwanzaa is built around 7 principles. Values meant to be practiced, not just recited. They include self-determination, collective responsibility, cooperative economics, purpose, creativity, and faith. Not faith in a religious sense, but faith in ourselves and in one another. And as you can see, Pastor Jim lit 4 candles. Today is the 4th day of Kwanzaa. These are not abstract ideas. They are practical ones. They ask questions like, how do we raise young people who know their worth? How do communities repair harm instead of pretending it never happened? How do we build futures that are stronger rather than the pasts we inherited? Those questions led to the creation of what I call the Legacy Project. For me, the Legacy Project is an educational and cultural initiative rooted in a simple belief. Young people cannot fully thrive if they are disconnected from their history. This is not about blame or guilt. It is about grounding. Research consistently shows that culturally grounded education improves engagement, academic confidence, and resilience, especially for students navigating systems that were not designed with them in mind. Many Black students spend remarkably little time learning about Black history beyond slavery or civil rights soundbites. That absence has consequences. They learn about their pain before they ever get to learn about their pride. They learn about what came after the ocean and nothing about what came before it. When a young person only encounters their ancestors as victims or footnotes or problems to be solved, it shapes how they see themselves and what they believe is possible. This Legacy Project seeks to change that by combining education, reflection, and immersive experience, to connect young people to the global African diaspora, not as an abstract concept, but as a living continuum of creativity, resistance, and contribution. To emphasize that history is not something that happened to people. It is something that people made, often under extraordinary circumstances. So why does this matter now? because we are living in a moment when history itself feels contested, when teaching the past is framed as dangerous, divisive, or even optional, when discomfort is confused with harm, and when young people across racial and cultural lines are being asked to navigate an increasingly complex world without the tools that history provides. Kwanzaa offers a counterpoint. It insists that identity does not have to divide us, that knowing who you are can deepen, not diminish, your ability to live in community with others. That responsibility to one's own story can coexist with care for the collective good. For a largely white congregation, I want to be very clear about this. Honoring Kwanzaa does not mean taking something away from anyone else's story. It means making room for a fuller one. It means acknowledging that some communities have had to fight to preserve memory in ways others did not, and that preserving memory is a form of care. This legacy project is not about looking backward with nostalgia. It's about moving forward with intention, about raising young people who are rooted enough to engage the world with confidence and empathy, about creating space where history becomes a source of strength rather than silence. Kwanzaa ends with a question that feels especially relevant today. What will we build, and for whom? In a time of polarization, erasure, and disconnection, Kwanzaa and the Legacy Project together offer something quietly radical. The idea that remembering is an act of responsibility, that culture can be a bridge rather than a barrier, and that the work of building a just future begins with telling the truth about how we got here. That is why Kwanzaa matters now, not just for Black communities, but for all of us who believe that a stronger society begins with understanding, dignity, and a shared responsibility. I'll leave you with this question. Today seems to be a day of questions, doesn't it? What responsibilities do we have individually or collectively to ensure that young people grow up knowing where they came from? And how might that knowledge benefit all of us and prepare them to engage in a diverse world with empathy? Thank you.
So Joan gifted us this beautiful kinara, am I saying that right? This beautiful kinara for us to have to display about Kwanzaa. We had her come a dozen times between the preschool and up here to talk about it. She said, you should have your own kinara. So she's going to just talk a little bit about the kinara, and then if you have any questions, you can answer some questions. Otherwise, you can just stay and listen to Joan explain the kinara and the setup here. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Hello again. So I talked about the 7 principles of Kwanzaa, and each candle on the kinara represents a principle. And it starts with umoja, which means unity. And the second principle is kujujakulia, which is self-determination. Ujima, which means collective work and responsibility. Ujama, or cooperative economics. Nia, which means purpose. Kuumba, which is creativity. And Imani, which equals faith. And so lighting one candle each day during the course of Kwanzaa, starting from December 26th, ending on January 1st, there is no hard and fast rule in terms of the, the series in which you light the candles. The Kinara itself represents the continent of Africa. The green represents the fruits of the harvest. Kwanzaa is based on sort of a harvest festival. And the red is for the blood that was shed by those who were taken into captivity. And the black is for the people of the continent. So, as you can see, the Kinara is the main symbol, and then other symbols represent the harvest. There, you can put on fruit or vegetables on your display just to represent the harvest. And then you have the mkeka, which is the mat upon which everything sits. The muhindi is really the word for the harvest representation, whether it's corn or legume or potatoes. And the mazao as well is the word for fruit. And the zawadi is typically handmade gifts, because again, Kwanzaa is a cultural commemoration to make sure that we remain grounded. And so it's not about purchasing. It's not about the commercialization or the capitalization of reflection. It's about being in community with each other. And so zawadi is usually handmade gifts. It could be cloth, it could be clay, it could be anything that one can make with their own hands to show the intention that's involved in the holiday. And actually, my family and I learned about Kwanzaa really more deeply in the 1990s when we had registered our firstborn daughter into a program called the African Shule. And Shule is the Kiswahili word for school. And so every Saturday we would take our daughter down to New Rochelle, and she learned about various aspects of African and Black history and culture. And it was sort of like a one-room schoolhouse, because there were kids of all varying ages who were learning about these things at the same time. And the elders in the community, who each had an expertise, would come in to teach a class, whether it was about music or art or science or history. It was really a very lovely program that stuck with me. And that was sort of the genesis of what I was talking about earlier, the legacy project. For me, the idea is that there is a disconnect. And when I speak of memory, I speak of the memory that we have as a collective, as a people, in terms of what we once had on the continent versus what we are taught here on this side of the ocean. When I speak of learning about our pain before we get to even learn about our pride, in terms of understanding what beautiful, rich, and full community was occurring on the continent of Africa, where we don't really get to learn about that until we're adults and maybe take an African culture course in college. But our students here in primary school don't get to learn about the traditions and the tribes and the culture on the continent before they learn about slavery and civil rights. And it's really just a very compact history. Students learn about Black history that might only represent about 8% of their total learning in school of history. And again, it's usually just confined to slavery and civil rights, when we know that it's much fuller and much more rich than that. Not that we shouldn't know about that, but there needs to be a balance. We need to reconnect our memory to what transpired before the ocean, before the Middle Passage, before the transatlantic slave trade. I just want to point to this calendar that Pastor Jim handed me. It is a history of racial injustice that was created by the Equal Justice Institute. The Equal Justice Institute was started by Brian Stevenson, who wrote the book, oh my gosh, what's it called?
Mercy.
Just Mercy.
Just mercy.
Just Mercy. And he is an attorney, and he took it upon himself to work to release those people who were kept on death row in the South. And he continues to do that work today. The Equal Justice Initiative has grown into a tremendous cultural presence, particularly in Montgomery, Alabama. And in 2024, if I may continue, in 2024, I had the immense pleasure of having a couple of things happen. I was invited to join the board of an organization called Journeys to Change. Journeys to Change is based out of Westchester, and they cultivate and curate immersive travel and experiences around civil, human, and labor rights. And as a new board member in a newly cohesive organization, all of the board members and myself took a trip to Montgomery. This is one of the immersive experiences that Journeys to Change organizes. And we went to Montgomery, and we went to Selma. And we stood on the banks of the Alabama River that comes right through Montgomery, because that was the main artery to transport the captive Africans to the South, throughout the South. And I stood on the banks of that river. And then we were asked, we were told, we were ordered to stand single file, one hand in front of the other on the other shoulder, as we marched up Commerce Street. And this was in July, in the heat of summer. I don't know if any of you have been to the South in the summertime, but it's really hot. And we were marched up Commerce Street. We didn't go all the way to the center of town, which is where the auction block was. But we were told to imagine what it must have been like to take that journey across the Atlantic, to not know the people who were around you speak the same language, to have survived that journey, and then to be marched up Commerce Street, because this was commerce, up to the auction block. And it was at that moment that I realized that it was time for me to do something else with my life. And that's when I decided to step down as trustee for the Village of Portchester and commit myself to creating the Legacy Project. Because for me, the disconnect is right there. I've been to Gorée Island in Senegal. I've stood at the door of no return looking at the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean, feeling the smoothed and curved walls of the cells that held millions of bodies before they departed on those ships. And here I am now on the other side of that journey. And so the Legacy Project seeks to bring two things together: the learning, the understanding, having the opportunity to learn about the pride before the pain, and connecting it with an immersive trip to West Africa so that we can begin to repair the connective tissue that's been severed by history. So, Journeys to Change, I would highly recommend you all looking into that. Every November, we conduct a trip to Montgomery for people who are interested to know about that history. And the immersiveness of it is that you get to meet people who were part of history, not just looking at labels or buildings or plaques that were left behind, but actually speak to people who are working right now to change that course and to rectify the harm. One of the people we met is Joanne Bland. She was a child, 8 years old, when she marched with her family over the Edmund Pettus Bridge with John Lewis and many others. And we got to hear firsthand what it felt like for her as a child to do that. And these are some of the voices that you would hear from if you were to journey with us to Montgomery. And so I would invite all of you to take that opportunity, to see firsthand, to speak with, to break bread with people who are not just seeing history happen to them, but are making history, as I mentioned earlier. I'm happy to stay behind and offer more information, show you the website. But again, for those of you who would be interested, I would be happy to help you get there. And again, I want to thank Pastor Jim for inviting me. Thank you for listening. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year and Happy Kwanzaa. Any questions? I should. Anybody have any questions? Today's the day of questions, right? Today is the day of questions. If you have questions, happy to try to answer them.
Hi, Lisa. Hi, Lori. Hi, Barbara.
Hi. Hi, Pastor.
Did you have any questions about
Good
Kwanzaa?
morning. No, that was great.
No, very good. Thank you.
That was really good. Thank you.
Very good presentation.
Have a great day, everybody.
I don't know. Take care.
You too. Enjoy.
Hi, Lisa.
Bye.
Stay warm.
Yeah, right.
Bye, Norma.
But and he didn't do it alone, right? I mean, he is,
Bye, Russell.
often spoken of,
All right.
spoken of in our church at Kwanzaa, but there were others who were part of that.